All right, thanks everyone for joining early. We'll be starting in just a minute here.
We're not presenting it.
All right, everyone. Sorry for being a minute over. Thank you all for joining our session today. My name is Maggie Schroeder. I'm a senior product marketing manager at Acquia. If you haven't attended any of my sessions yet, great to have you here. So of course, you already know what you're joining, but the session today that we're going to be walking through is the enterprise architect and the marketer. So a beautiful and productive partnership. And I think that this is a new partnership for a lot of those that I've been speaking to lately. Of course, anytime during this presentation, please feel free to contribute to the chat. We have a lot of open-ended questions today for our enterprise architects who will be joining us. And we'd love to hear, what your experience has been like, or what you think, the answer is, especially for you, to some of the questions we'll be walking through today. But with that, I'm actually going to start off with some introductions. We are still waiting on one of our attendees to join us. So with that, I'll actually be passing it over first for an introduction to Thomas, who is already on our call today. So Thomas, if you don't mind giving yourself a quick introduction.
Okay, thank you very much, Maggie. I'm the enterprise architect at Acquia. I deal with the internal data structures and essentially the strategies we use to standardize how we want our various data objects across the company to interact with one another, and how we approach the question of things like how we organize our product metadata so that it can then be used in multiple scenarios, such as Salesforce, when we have marketing communications, when we build our products, when we have support tickets, as well as a slew of other systems and contexts in which that is important.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Thomas. Yeah, and so, as a marketer myself at Acquia, Thomas and I have actually started working a lot together, and I've noticed that this is a recent change even for us here at Acquia. So it's super exciting, and I think a lot of the insight Thomas will give throughout the presentation is going to be super useful for those of you in the audience who are marketers or maybe even enterprise architects to kind of, spark some ideas of how you can work together. So with that, I'm actually going to jump into our first question here, Thomas, for to pose to you. Love to hear, and I gave kind of a little bit of my insight into what the new relationship between enterprise architects and marketers are. But, I'd love, Thomas, to hear from your perspective, what that shift's been like recently at Acquia and how you've always interacted with marketers in general.
So more traditionally, the way I had interacted with marketers was less collaborative in nature. It was more, we each operated in our silo, and work would be performed from a marketing perspective, such as how we might group a set of products together and put them into a category. And so the marketers would come to me and say, this is our list of our products and our product names. And I would react to that, and then just work on implementing it and ensuring that within the recommendations I gave to our various system owners, that we would approach it in a standard way. Instead of just doing that, when we work collaboratively, there's a feedback loop in which someone such as Maggie and I are able to communicate about what her specific needs are, what her goals are for the products that she's responsible for. And it allows me to both funnel that insight more directly into the decisions that I make that can have impacts such as what fields or attributes you wish to attach to a particular data object. So for instance, if we create a data object called product, and we wanted to know when the next marketing campaign was going to be occurring, and we decided that we wanted to store that data as part of the object so that all the other consumers of that object across the organization could coordinate or trigger off of that event, they could do so. So by having conversation, it gives me more insight to what matters to marketers, as well as what matters to the rest of the organization. And I think it leads to a much more robust outcome. So sorry, I can talk a little bit much, but.
Great. I would say, maybe as a follow-on, I think that insight was great. What would you say, the risks are when you don't have that relationship between marketing and enterprise architects? What are some of the impacts that you've seen, from a lack of communication over your years?
So a very simple use case is in language definition or description. So what I had seen traditionally was a lot more like really strict segmentation, where within a given silo, they might refer to something with completely different words, but the same definition, or the opposite, they could use the same word or same abbreviation with very different meanings. And that led to a lot of opportunity for confusion, and it introduces technical debt and like a lot of risk to the process of disseminating data across the organization.
Inconsistency can definitely lead to, misunderstanding, technical debt even, and that's huge. It's going to hold you back ultimately from delivering on business objectives at the speed that you want, right? It's going to impair velocity at the end of the day. So, yeah, great insight, Thomas. I guess with that, I'll kind of lead into the next question, which is, and I think you kind of hinted at it a little bit, but I guess, how are enterprise architects helping to drive marketing initiatives forward? And throughout the Engage conference, I think we've heard of a ton of different customer stories of different initiatives they've been successful in. From your perspective, Thomas, how would you say, again, enterprise architects are helping to really drive in the background some of these marketing initiatives?
So I think that one of the really awesome opportunities I've had is I try to take I guess a more rigorous approach to how I think about information. And that's not to say that marketers don't have rigor. It's the exact opposite. Marketers are subject matter experts in what they do. But the approach can be less scientific, if you will, because when I'm dealing with something as abstract as what I want the data to look like in a table, in a database, I have to think about it in a really specific way. And so when a marketer is going to market with something, there is almost an art to it that is missing from my side of the picture. But what I can bring to that side of the picture is saying, okay, we want to have a hierarchical organization. We want to make certain that the parent-child relationship in the products makes reasonable sense. Does it pass a certain type of sniff test? And so in looking at what we want to do, we can sit there and say, we have Drupal Cloud. What naturally falls within Drupal Cloud? And we can check to see, does the marketer's instincts match with what we might want our systems to do? And it also helps us to make better decisions about at what points do we want to automate our provisioning, et cetera.
Definitely great insight, and especially, I'd love to hear, Thomas, from your perspective as well. When, marketers are evaluating, new martech, to add to their existing stack, or maybe, even looking to replace maybe some of the martech they have in their stack. What kind of considerations would you recommend they take, and also when would you suggest that they pull in an enterprise architect to kind of help with that evaluation?
Well, I could selfishly say I like to know very early in the process. But realistically speaking, I would say as early as is reasonable. You don't want to impede the ability to really check everything that's out there. From a marketer's perspective, my experience has been that you don't want to overcomplicate the tool set that you're interacting with. And so as an enterprise architect, I can belabor the details. I can get a little bit too deep into things. So too early in the process can impede the freedom that you need. But the earlier that I am involved in looking at technology, the earlier I can say this matches what we've set as our course or our vision for how we want to interact with other systems. We can look at such technical requirements as, is it something that has an API? Is it something that our other infrastructure is going to be able to easily integrate? Or is it going to require extensive customizations or a lot of consulting time, et cetera?
And this might be a little bit of a gimme, but I think you started to hint at this. We talk a lot here at Acquia about being open. And I'd love to hear, from an enterprise architect's perspective, what are really the benefits of an open platform?
Okay. So from an open platform, it's kind of, I guess, a mirror image of a capitalist market, in that it really forces people to say, when they look at something, is this really truly doing what I want it to do? Rather than having to make do or accept unwanted compromises, you can really look at things and say, well, I do have choices and I want to get the best of breed for solving the problem that I have. And I'll put in a little plug for open source here. I'm a big fan of open source. So not only do we want systems to be open, not only do we want APIs, but it's really important to be able to have a broad community that's looking at the tooling that you're using. The more open everything can be, essentially the more oversight you've got going on, the more opportunities to catch mistakes or to see a different way of solving a problem. My history, my background was very Drupal based, and I found so many opportunities to improve how I think about information and data based upon how, as a community, we've interacted and developed Drupal over the decades that it's been in existence. And so the same approach, you want API first, you want to be able to interact with these things, you want them to be able to integrate, but you want them to be open so that you can select the best solution for any given problem.
Absolutely. Thomas, I think that's such great insight too, especially for those, who might be attending this session who haven't been as familiar with open technologies. Hopefully that gave you a little bit of an insight into, how your enterprise architects in your organization, or if you are an enterprise architect and you've been considering moving towards, a more open first strategy, that gave you a little bit of insight. So great. And actually, what I'm going to do, Thomas, is, and my slides stopped sharing for some reason. We've got a couple more questions as well. But again, I'd like to urge anyone in the chat. We've got Thomas here, and he's a great resource. I know that I ask him a ton of questions, just on the day-to-day. So a wealth of knowledge. So feel free to drop your questions in. But, moving a little bit forward here. So generally, right, again, I mentioned that this is a really new relationship, an enterprise architect and a marketer. So I'd love, Thomas, from your perspective, to hear, what are some words of wisdom you have for marketing teams who might be looking to engage with their enterprise architect on a deeper level?
Okay. So I guess one of the first things that I would focus on is marketing by its very nature is outwardly looking. It looks at the market, at everything outside of you. But there is an equally important opportunity to socialize information internally. So by using good, rigorous structures, by approaching the problem deliberately rather than accidentally, you have a really huge opportunity to market internally, to really get a lot of feedback on your messaging in terms of, if we are saying or doing something that confuses us internally, wouldn't it stand to reason that there is a certain level of confusion externally to that same messaging? So again, if you've got a product and you have a definition of that product, being able to see that, wow, this is really great, but we want to understand which audiences we intend to speak to, and then looking at how our own reflection of those audiences internally respond, and then how the data moves through the organization. So that would be the first thing I would suggest. The second thing is look for opportunities where you can solve complex problems simply. So 2 years ago, I built a really simple Drupal site that I call the glossary, that its purpose internally is to help work with the marketing team to take the way we spell things, to take the punctuation, the context, the definitions, and ensure that I was exposing it to every other Acquian, to everyone else in the company. And by doing that, I provide an opportunity that others can interact with the system via an API and pull them for dropdowns in websites or other systems. I can ensure we have it available for reporting. And at the same time, everyone knows a common definition about the names used in reports. And so look for simple wins, and look for ways that you can really leverage the expertise on both sides of the equation, so that the marketers have like a really, really good understanding of the content. And that's really what we're talking about, is the architect is just looking at the framework or the structure, the design of how you want things to fit together. But the marketers have their understanding of what it is you want to say.
Yeah, no, Thomas, those are two really great pieces of advice. And also we're getting a question from the audience as well. And I think this kind of melds really nicely with the kind of words of wisdom you have for marketers. And so the question is, it just popped up. What's your wish list for marketers in terms of working with EAs? So I suppose that means, what do you wish that they would do when they work with you? And then the follow on to that is, more specifically, what's the best way to start projects inclusively for both groups?
So the first thing that I would ask for from a marketer is come to me with the list of words and the definitions of those words as you see them, and come to me with a good description of the audiences that you're trying to speak to, so that we can identify any gaps internally, so that when we try to unify systems, we know that we're all talking the same language. And the best way to start projects, the best way is just to start talking. I think traditionally we assumed we didn't need to as much. And I would just specifically go out of my way to say, hey, I want to talk to the enterprise architect, is how I'd approach it.
Awesome. And we got another, comment from Margot. Margot, thank you for contributing. One challenge they said Margot said they've had is the architect ends up needing to redo a lot of things that they've solved on the assumption that it was a one-off situation, which, Thomas, I see you nodding there. Is that something that, you're pretty familiar with as well?
Yeah, no, that's 100% true. A lot of times, and that's where you incur technical debt, is you solve something that actually exists as a pattern across the enterprise, and you try to solve it for a single product, for instance, and then suddenly you see something along the lines of, we want this is how we want an audience to be described in terms of how we express them inside our systems, but each individual product is addressing that problem differently. So in one place, we have people's first name, and in another place, you don't have their first name. And so rather than going back to that standard object of who am I, who's the person that I want to communicate to, what is their role, etc. I have to then redo the work over and over. And sometimes there can even be like just mistakes. You had a very restricted view of how you wanted to approach it, and you needed something much more robust.
Awesome, Thomas. And we have time for one last question. We're right at the top of the 20 minutes here, but one from Simon. What kind of tools do you use to capture use cases or thoughts from marketing teams systematically? So I guess, do we use any tools that you know of?
We're not currently using any tools, but we could easily use Jira. I would essentially, in terms of tools, I recommend if you've got, if you're using something like a Scrum approach to things, that you want to try and standardize where you do things. And if you use Confluence or you use some form of wiki, just go to the place where you're storing information about the technical projects and do that work there. Additionally, I tend to use a lot of spreadsheets because I like to collaborate and see things from a grid perspective. So I do a lot of things in Google Sheets simply because it's a fast and dirty tool. But ideally, I would be doing everything in Jira myself, and it would be a part of the projects that we work on.
Thanks so much, Thomas. And I'm definitely familiar with your Google Sheets. For those of you who don't have the pleasure of working with Thomas, which I'm assuming is most of you on the line, he is a wizard at Google Sheets. They're some of the best that I've ever seen. So with that, we are out of time. Thomas, thank you so much for sharing so much insight into the mind of an enterprise architect and some ways that we can, as marketers and enterprise architects, work better together. We're definitely going to be continuing this conversation in the Drupal Cloud booth. So feel free to head over there and we'll continue talking a little bit more about this newfound relationship between enterprise architects and marketing teams. But otherwise, head off to maybe another session, maybe the Marketing Cloud booth, maybe the Drupal Cloud booth, or visit any of our partners' booths over in the Partner Pavilion. Thank you all for joining us today and have a great rest of Acquia Engage.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks for coming.